Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to another StarCraft 2 video. Now what I got for you today is a best of 3 series of professional Protoss versus Terran. Spawning here in the bottom left hand corner of Lost and Found in game number 1 of this series and playing with the blue Terran SCVs. He's from South Korea and he goes by the nickname of Ryung. And his opponent spawning in the opposite corner of the map. He's playing with the red Protoss probes. Also from South Korea, we are currently looking in the main base of Hurricane. So here's the thing. Both of these players have been around for years and years and years in StarCraft 2, and both of them are actually qualified for the upcoming season of the GSL Code S. Basically the highest level tournament in StarCraft 2, and the only way you can qualify yourself is by either ranking extremely highly in the previous season. I think they only seat like either the semi-finalists or maybe even the grand finalists. But anyways, you can either seat yourself by ranking very highly in the previous season of the GSL, or by making your way through some really tough qualifiers. And both of them actually have made it past the qualification stages. And while neither of them have really, they've never really like won any super high level, premier level tournaments, they are both very good. And I figured today it's about time we broaden our horizons a little and check out some players who are very good at the game, but who may be overshadowed by, for example, in Ryung's case, players like, for example, Maru, and maybe in Hurricane's case, for example, players like Zest or Classic right now, at this time in StarCraft 2. So let's do some rapid fire information on both of them, okay? So Ryung has been around since the very beginning of StarCraft. I actually just had a look at his Wikipedia page. The man in total has been on 14 different teams. That's ridiculous. I mean, even if you've been playing since 2010, that's still, you know, like 2 teams almost every year. I don't even really know exactly how you know, managed to get, that many teams. It's kind of ridiculous. But he's been part of, for example, Prime, of Incredible Miracle, of Slayers, of Axiom, of several different teams. And I believe right now he's in Cascade, if I say that correctly. I'm not entirely sure about that. Don't quote me on the last part. But regardless, he's earned roughly $106,000 in prize money alone. So definitely rather successful. Although obviously you do have to spread that out over about an 8-year time period. Hurricane, on the other hand, he's not been playing since the very beginning, I don't think. But he has been very strong since right around 2012 or so. He has won a couple of tournaments over in Asia, but nothing quite at the level like, for example, a GSL Code S. Otherwise, you probably would have known him a little bit better as well. But he's always been a very strong contender. And as far as prize money goes, he has earned roughly $53,000 in prize money alone. Now, before I ramble onwards, let us have a look at the build orders. So Ryung actually looks like he's sort of trying to hide his barracks off on the left-hand side of his base. Could very well be a tech lab on it in just a little bit, making it just a little trickier for this Protoss player to scout. We do see the double Cyclone opener. This actually looks a lot like the style that I like playing in Terran versus Protoss. I really have come to enjoy the way that Cyclones play. They seem to sort of counter pretty much everything that Terran, or rather that Protoss has in the early game. Obviously, as soon as there's like an Immortal out or whatever, they are not nearly as powerful, but they do have a lot of potential, in particular pre like 100 or so army supply. Hurricane, though, playing pretty standard here, going up to a couple of additional gateways right now. He's already chrono boosting out that very first Immortal. He didn't really, he did see, a little bit of information here, but he didn't really scout anything super clearly. The thing is, though, this is one of the more common builds, and having that Immortal out quite early will still keep you relatively safe. You see him already splitting off some of the Stalkers, just in case there's, like, for example, a medevac coming in or anything else that flies. There's also the Observer in case of Cloaked Banshees, and basically this is a very straightforward kind of playstyle here from our player in red. Here's the thing, though, Cyclones that deal a lot of damage. Obviously, he does need to be careful. Hurricane will end up losing that Cyclone, or rather the Immortal here, which all of a sudden puts him in a very peculiar position. There's now another one of those Observers coming out, but that already is a lot of damage here from Ryung. Even though he did a build that is not super common, it is still something that can usually, it shouldn't be allowed to deal this much damage. That's 6 probes already, and I don't think he's done just yet. Look at that. Ryung is going to continue this aggression for a little while longer. Hurricane, oh my god, lining up the probes. That is 17 workers in just a matter of seconds, and these Hellions, they're hunting for more. I think that's gonna be a grand total of 20. Hellions once again, though, moving across the map. A relatively small commitment. I mean, obviously, Cyclones aren't cheap, right? They do have to sort of cut the corner in the early game of not being quite as safe against several different builds that the Protoss can throw at you. But there's no denying that if they start rolling properly, they can deal a huge amount of damage. Now, here's that Banshee follow-up. We see the Dark Shrine coming up here for our Protoss player as well, but it is now scouted here by Ryung, and apparently Hurricane doesn't feel it. He decides to GG out immediately. It's kind of funny. I cast obviously a lot of different games of StarCraft 2, right? And I sometimes see people asking in the comment section, like, do these guys ever make mistakes? Well, yes, they do, but oftentimes those kind of games don't necessarily make it to the YouTube channel. Obviously, I usually try to look for the more epic games. I cast several games. Sometimes I go up to like 5 or so games before I actually upload anything to the YouTube channel. So I get, at the very least, some really good matches for you. But you do have to keep in mind that, you know, they make mistakes. Like, believe it or not, the pro gamers are actually human, okay? I know, shocking. But they are actually humans, with the exception of maybe innovation. I mean, you know, innovation is innovation. He's like, he's very robotic. Although recently, as you probably know, he's been mixing it up a lot more. But anyways, they most definitely do make mistakes from time to time, and it's just, in particular with Protoss, like, you can't really make any mistakes. Right? If you skip the shield battery, like for example Hurricane did, all of a sudden you are way more vulnerable. And you may have the Immortal, which is pretty good against, for example, like Marauder-based pushes or anything, you know, remotely aggressive in the early game. It's going to be a lot more tricky to hold your ground against a bunch of Cyclones and then those Hellions as a follow-up. And then the Banshee in the main base, it was just too much, and Hurricane decides to GG out of that match immediately. Let's see if he can put himself back together and if he can maybe play something that is just a little bit more safely. Now, of course, this map works a little bit differently as well. You got this nice little ramp where you can sort of just patrol the high ground a lot more easily as well. Obviously, you do want to play a strategy that is up to the different kinds of map layouts too, but while Hurricane is now scouting here, he will figure out shortly that there is going to be an expansion for our Terran player in red. At the very least, I'm expecting there will be one here in just a second, even though the barracks will just about to be finishing up, we're just about to finish up the very first Reaper here too. Ryung is going to be able to get that base up and running without actually being forced to, for example, put it over in the main base, which happens from time to time. Reactor now coming up. No second gas just yet, so I don't think Ryung is quite going to go for the same build. Maybe going for something a little bit more standard. Couple of probes now actually scouting out though, look at that. Hurricane being very anxious that something might be happening in this game. Obviously, in a best-of-3 series in particular, it's really important that, you know, you win game number 1, because if you lose game number 1, right, it all of a sudden opens up the opportunity for your opponent to do something a little bit more aggressive. They've got a little bit more wiggle room, and they can definitely go ahead and cut several corners. In particular, when you delay their expansion, they are forced to spend their money somewhere. Hurricane now, though, does have himself that Stalker out. He's now going up towards the robotic facilities, something very, very standard, but I wouldn't be surprised if he follows it up with a shield battery or two in just a little bit as well. You want to confirm that there is indeed going to be that command center on the low ground here too, and right at this point, he notices, hey, wait a second, I don't see anything all too cheeky just yet. There's already a third command center coming up here for Ryung. So rather than playing, like, this is another option, right? Rather than playing super, like, aggressive and trying to, for example, cheese your opponent out of the second game when you're 1-0 ahead, you could also do sort of like an economic cheese, right? Ryung trying to go for a really greedy third command center. This is not something that's easy to scout here whatsoever for our Protoss, and that means that for now, Protoss will be mostly in the blind, and while Ryung is playing super greedy, it is definitely something he can use to his advantage. I like this a lot. Look at that. Putting the Reaper in hold position in the bush. That Stalker did not realize what is going on. Apparently one of the observers needed to jump out of the game really quickly, but no big deal. No shield battery once again in the front though. I'm actually quite surprised. I guess that Hurricane did scout with the very first probe that there wasn't once again going to be a factory with a reactor, so he probably felt okay. Still feels like, you know, it is something that you can usually get with a relatively small investment. Obviously, it does slow down your potential third base here as well, which does look, it does look right now like that is something that Hurricane is looking to get. There we go. We do see the Blink Stalker upgrade coming up. Robotics facility is already producing a couple of observers here too. This time around, we did not quite see anything along the lines of, for example, an Immortal just yet. I guess that's all because of the Probe Scout, though. It's really critical that you scout early on as a Protoss player what it is the Terran is going for, but it's oftentimes so difficult. Well, there we go. Hurricane now knows that his opponent went for a very greedy opener. There's only just now an additional barracks coming up. We don't see a starport, right? Just because the factory still has to be built as well. That is something that... oh, there it is, I was going to say. That is something that we do have to keep in mind. Hurricane knows about this, so there's definitely potential for him to potentially go for a... there's definitely potential for him to go for a really aggressive follow-up, because he knows his opponent's unit production is going to be quite a little bit less than you would otherwise expect. Ryung, though, not quite recognizing the shimmer there, or maybe he just doesn't want to spend a scan on it for the time being. It is pretty expensive to try and do something along those lines. There we go. He is looking for it, and he will be able to scout that observer, making the vision just a little bit harder here for his opponent as well. Now, the bunker actually gets cancelled. Interesting. He knows his opponent just scouted pretty much everything. Hurricane did just get himself that Warp Prism as well. He's going to go for a rather aggressive push, getting a couple of those sentries here too. Maybe he's even looking to blink up into the main base and then force field the top of the ramp. There is a blink available. Do not forget about that. That's an absolutely massive deal. Here we go. Oh my god, the sentries get dropped off. The stalkers blink into the main base. That was a super sexy move there, preventing this Terran player from getting into his own main base. And while these sentries eventually will run out of energy, there's already a lot of damage being dealt here. That upgrade for our Terran player will not finish up anytime soon. More and more sentries coming up though. Hurricane is just going to continuously wall his opponent out of his own main base. Very cheeky. This is what happens when you don't bring, for example, Medevacs. Well, there we go. Medevacs will eventually finish up, and I do think that this Protoss will be forced out of here in just a bit, or he can maybe continue onwards with the aggression for just a little while longer. Stalker's trying to blink up towards the low ground. They're going to continue their harassment here for a little while longer. And Hurricane, with an exceptional read there, will be able to deal a lot of damage to the Terran player. All of a sudden, right, we see how many workers went down there? Yeah, it's 16 in total. All of a sudden, we see Hurricane sitting at 63 probes versus only 38 SCVs at this point in time. That's 3 base fully saturated here for our Protoss versus only, well, I guess 1 base and a little bit, really, for Ryung. So that's not the situation we want to be in. Ryung now, though, trying to see if he can go for maybe a bit of a push. I do like this decision from him. He's got a decent amount of upgrades. The thing is, he doesn't have Combat Shield, and Combat Shield is absolutely critical in these kind of scenarios. It makes it so much easier for pretty much everything that the Protoss player has to pick up those units for practically free. Immortals are now being built. I would love to see some sort of splash damage coming out of Hurricane. He's now mostly sitting... Does he have charge? No, no charge yet either. Charge actually... Okay, I was going to say, he does need that upgrade in just a bit. I would like to see him, for example, go for Colossus, or maybe even High Templar, or even Disruptors. I mean, anything that deals splash damage is going to be good. For the time being, though, Hurricane is going to be sitting primarily on just Stalkers and Zealots, and then some Immortals here for support as well. Obviously, he does still have those sentries, too, from earlier on, which is really nicely done. Warp Prism here. Once again, trying to be a bit of a nuisance. I think if he were to be aware of exactly how many Terran units are moving out, he would probably already move in. But regardless, he will find out in just a little bit, and that Warp Prism is already looking to deal a bunch of damage. Terran's currently moving across the map. A Warp Prism is now dropping off Zealots over on the other side of the map, and that's a massive Warp in. That's 6 additional Zealots. That's going to be a huge amount of damage that will be dealt here. And while Ryung does manage to get himself an observer there for his troubles, that's not quite the scenario that you want to be in. He does also have that low HP Medevac still, and those Zealots, they're not being dealt with whatsoever. There's not enough production here, and you can't mass Rico if you are the Terran, obviously, to really deal a lot of damage. Here we go, though. Doom drop inside of that main base. We do see the Stalkers blinking forward. They target fire down. Not the one with low HP. I think that one was just barely out of range. A couple of High Templar are now out as well, which is nice, but Storm is not finished just yet, but it looks like there's just way too many units. Sometimes StarCraft 2 is just a numbers game, and while we do see a phenomenal split here by Ryung on all of his SCVs, Hurricane with that smart force field on the ramp obtained the victory. Alrighty, and game number 3 will bring us to Darkness Sanctuary. I'm quite surprised. This is usually a map that pro gamers really don't want to play. In particular, Protosses and Terrans usually don't really like this. I mean, the thing is, Zerg likes expanding, right? Zerg like taking a lot of bases, and the more mineral patches there are on a map, usually the happier a Zerg player is gonna be as well. There are so many mineable bases on this map, it's absolutely ludicrous. Apparently though, both Ryung and Hurricane, even in a best of 3, don't necessarily mind playing on this map. So I'm curious to see if maybe one of them has got a bit of a strategy planned. I've seen some Protosses, for example, go for like a Nexus first. Obviously, it takes a long time for the opponent to scout out pretty much anything, but neither player, I mean, they know they're one game away from losing, right? One game away from winning, for that matter, as well, but they know that there is, you know, very little room for error, so both of them going for the barracks, and then also, of course, that gateway here first. Nothing out of the ordinary just yet. Probe is now moving across the map, no scouting whatsoever for Ryung. He's likely going to do so with that Reaper once it inevitably does come out. Sadly for the Probe, it will scout his opponent's base at the very last possible moment. Although, is it actually going to be sent across? Is it actually going to go diagonally? Oh my god. That's kind of crazy. Usually you would really expect him to go towards the... Okay, no, he does still go there. He's just touching the sensor tower for a little bit to see if there's anything really aggressive coming his way. So it's literally going to be the last possible moment. That probe is a sad probe. Could have mined several hundreds of resources at that point. SCV now though, moving horizontally first. Ryung getting just a little bit more lucky. He's going to be sending the Reaper towards the top left-hand corner just to try and figure out where the opposing player has spawned. It's always a little bit tricky. There haven't really been a lot of 4-player maps recently in professional SC2. Darkness Sanctuary was around for a little while already in the GSL, so maybe that's the reason why both of these players have decided to go for it. This is one of the GSL maps that was already played in the GSL, I believe, in the place of Battle on the Boardwalks or something silly like that. Like, there was a map that was just a little bit ludicrous. I think it was Battle on the Boardwalks, and then the GSL organizers were like, you know what, that map is a little too crazy. We're gonna come up with a really big macro map instead, which is usually what the Korean players do prefer playing on, although this map was downvoted so many times. Nobody really in the GSL played this map, so I was quite surprised when Blizzard decided to add Darkness Sanctuary to the ladder, just because there were all kinds of little bugs. Basically, you had to wall off, almost like it was Brute War if you were a Protoss player or a Terran player for that matter, just because there were like these weird corners at the choke points that just made it really difficult to build buildings, and Blizzard fixed those, so that all of a sudden made it a much better map. Obviously, they also made the map significantly more bright, which was one of my most requested things. I could not see any of my own units for the life of me on the previous iteration of Darkness Sanctuary. I mean, the name literally says Darkness, and I understand that, but I mean, if I can't see my own army, it's it obviously gets a little bit silly. Anyways, we did not see that Twilight Council follow-up. Once again, very common opener here from Hurricane. Not really going for anything out of the ordinary. Much quicker Twilight, though, this time around, so he's going to be able to go for... actually, I don't know if it's that much quicker than game number 2, but anyways, he's going to be able to go for... once again, probably Blink Stalkers or, for example, charge a little bit more aggressively if he likes to. Judging by the fact that we do see a third gas now coming up, it is very likely going to be Blink here in just a little bit. There we go. Ryung now, though, opening up not with Cyclones here initially. He is getting them right at this point as well. They are going to be coming out in just a little bit, but he already has 4 Hellions. Now, obviously, there's not really a wall here at the front. I mean, that wall is absolutely massive if it were to be coming up. Plus, you don't really usually want to get it. There's already this medevac too, though. And obviously, Ryung, he can drop off into this humongous main base completely unnoticed. You smell that? Smells like a pro barbecue. It honestly does smell like a pro barbecue. Now, the Reaper forcing that Stalker all the way towards the third base location. And sure, there's a third Nexus now coming up, but that pro barbecue is not slowing down. That is a lot of dead probes for this point in the game. One of the Hellions does not quite make the evac point, but oh my god, ooh, I was gonna say, if he lines them up more, well, that's still 14 probes in just a matter of seconds. This will now effectively force the Terran player to just simply sit back and the Protoss to go for an all-in. I don't really see exactly what Hurricane could do. I wouldn't even mind it if he just cancels the third and just tries to go for, you know, a 2-base all-in. Obviously, he does still have a pretty solid amount of workers here, but the thing is, Ryung has got the third command center. He's dropping mules. Economically speaking, there's no denying that he's going to be quite significantly ahead, in particular once the third one comes up, and now even that one observer gets killed as well. They make a little sound. If you are a Terran player, this is a nice little way of noticing it. If you play with your game sound on, which you do definitely want to do, they make a little sound when they go in their surveillance mode. And if you can hear that, they're usually going to be on one of your bases. The sound used to be much louder. They actually nerfed the sound a bunch, but... or I guess they reduced the volume. They didn't really nerf it very much. I guess they nerfed Protoss indirectly. But anyways, it is a nice little way of trying to pick up those units. Well, Ryung, I mean, he doesn't really need to push, but he can try and test his waters just a little bit, right? Well, actually, interestingly enough, I thought that Hurricane would be in a terrible spot. Considering he lost 15 probes, he's not in an amazing one, but he does have that third nexus, and he's still going to be able to continuously chrono boost out more and more workers. He's now also going, once again, for a relatively... you know, light army, going for a bunch of gateways, not really anything heavy, no Colossus, no Stargate play, none of that. Just simply sitting on a relatively cheap to make army here as well. Plus he has Blink, and Blink obviously is one of those upgrades that gives you a ton of potential. In the meantime though, a couple of Hellions made their way towards the third base location. Looks like they will be cleared relatively easily. And... yeah, actually, the medevac also was picked off. So, Hurricane, everything considered, is not actually in a bad spot. Supply-wise, we are pretty much dead even. Worker-wise, Hurricane is not in a bad spot either. Although, obviously, you do have to take mules and whatnot into account. I don't mind this whatsoever. We do see now that upgrade finally coming up for Ryung. He's going to be able to transition towards that Marine Marauder-based composition. But it is going to be rather late. There's definitely potential right now for a push here for Hurricane. In particular now that he has Blink Stalkers. And, of course, with Charge just about to finish up. There's also a Warp Prism. How many gateways are there here in total? I think that's 8 in total so far. That's a solid amount. That's a solid amount. There we go. He's going to be able to really start putting on the pressure. And with these, well, these Widow Mines can definitely bring some additional damage here to the table. But with these units all near the front, there could definitely be a lot of damage. Stalkers blinking forward right now, trying to pick up that very first siege tank. They do manage to successfully pick that one off. There's another siege tank right here on the high ground. It's desperately trying to get a couple of those zealots. But I think Ryung may have been just a little bit too overconfident. He did kill a lot of units, yes, but he also lost a lot of his units in the process. Losing all of the Hellions, losing all of the Cyclones while the push was going on. Sure, he got himself a lot of kills, but he did not quite get himself the victory that he was looking for. That Hurricane was like, you know what if I just get Blink and I get Charged and I get about 8 gateways? I'm gonna be in a phenomenal spot. And even though this is not game over yet, nice re-rallying there, but that is a lot of SCVs there that got killed by the friendly Widow Mine. Ryung decides to GG out. And Hurricane is actually the player who obtains the victory. I gotta say, my favorite move of him was definitely in the natural, right? Or in the main base, I guess. Force-fielding the Terran players' units out of the own main base. And when they were standing in the natural in game 2, that was so sick. Anyways, for now, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I will see you once again in the next one.